Evening YouTube, my name's James PFP. This is the Banjocast. I got my big headphones on for now. Don't really need them on. Hey, what am I doing this evening? The Banjocast, it's pitchforks, it's flaming torches. I did some work last night going over video footage related to Charlottesville. And this evening, now that it's bright and early in the morning, I just finished watching The Hard Bastard. I didn't bother rebroadcasting that tonight. Hard Bastard got at his regular news show a little later than normal, and maintained it for the last several hours. Me, on the other hand, I was chatting up a storm while I could. But I was preparing myself much earlier tonight for a set of ongoing discussions. I imagine they'll be ongoing. It doesn't much matter if they're not. I mean, it's possible they won't be. Hey, always on top. Oh, right, no good. Shit. I'm also trying out some other software tonight. I'm trying out which is why you hear me clicking in the background here. I'm trying to figure out what to do first. Well, first of all, I'm going to turn off my camera for a moment. Yeah, right. My camera needs to be turned off in more than one place. Right here is where. You can see here on the side of the screen, I've got a new set of buttons. They're over here underneath my camera. You won't always see them. These buttons allow me to mark things up on the screen. Boy, am I happy. Gosh, am I happy. Wait a minute. Haha. But I can use more than my mouse to do this. This is the even better thing. I've got a pen which I can draw on the screen with, which will make for more interesting future endeavors, I think, as I can indicate things directly on the screen with my pen, or even mark stuff up. Draw as in mark up. And what am I going to do first here? Well, before I get into any real in-depth discussions, you might see up here I've got a couple of tabs already loaded. The second tab I've got linked in the description. This one I haven't. Glenn Zook, Kilo 9 Sierra Tango Hotel, posted this to the Health Kit mailing list. I imagine that's his ham radio operating license, yeah? Kilo 9. Many amateurs already know that 73 is from what is known as the Phillips code. Series of numeric messages conceived for the purpose of cutting down transmission time on the old land telegraph systems when sending text that is basically the same. Repetitive messages were given codes under the Phillips code. Repetitive messages with words that were frequently appearing in telegrams, from telegram to telegram, so it just got simpler to send the code. April 1935 issue of QST, and page 60, there is a short article on the origin of 73. Article was in summation of another article that appeared in the December bulletin from the Navy Department, Office of the Chief of Naval Operations. That would have been in December of 1934. Quotation from the Navy is as follows. You have to forgive me here, I'm doing two things at once. Fears from the research telegraph histories that in 1859 the telegraph people held a convention, and one of its features, I might truly have guessed this one, and one of its features was a discussion on the savings of line time. A committee was appointed to devise a code, reduce standard expression to symbols or figures. What's funny about this, as far as I'm concerned, is knowing that in the 20th century, they found mechanical means of doing this. In the late 19th and 20th centuries, they were working on mechanical means of doing the same thing. to cut down on transmission time, and there's other ways around it than using short codes. To reduce standard expressions to symbols or figures, committee worked out a figure code from figure 1 through 92. Most figure symbols became obsolete or obsolescent, but a few remain to this date, such as 4, which is, where shall I go ahead? Question. Figure 9 means wire chief being on the wire, and that everyone should close their keys. Wire chief being on the wire, i.e. whoever ostensibly owns the wire. Symbol 13 means I don't understand. 22 is love and a kiss, although that was altered. 30 means good night or the end. Symbol most often used now is 73, still in use with ham radio operators to this day. I heard 73 on the radio the other night. Someone said 73. They say it over their microphones, which means my compliments or my regards, and 92, or even best regards. 92 is the word deliver. Other figures in between the foregoing have fallen into almost complete disuse. One of the chief telegraphers of the Navy Department of Communications, a J.L. Bishop, quoted from memory the signals that were in effect in 1905. Number 1, wait a minute. Number 4, where shall I start my message? Or in message. 5, have you anything for me? Question. 9, attention or clear the wire. Owner on. 13, I do not understand. 22, love and kisses. 25, busy on another circuit. 30, finished. N used, the N mainly used by press telegraphers. 73, my compliments or best regards. And then 92, deliver. Nowadays, 22 has become 88. Those days, nowadays 22 had become 88. It's the other way around. 88 had become 22. I don't know when this came about. 30 still used in the newspaper or magazine business to indicate the end of a feature, story, or column. Of course, 73 is still used by amateur radio operators to mean best regards. Many of these numbers, plural, 73s, 88s, etc., is incorrect since they are already plural. 73s would mean best regards is, and 88s would mean love and kisses is. Makes no sense. Anyway, the subject of where 73 comes from periodically. The subject of where 73 came from comes up periodically, and the article reinforces the Phillips code origin of 73. Jim, November 2, Echo Yankee, and some other related stuff. Phillips code 1931 refer to train orders. They were so well known that the terms 19 order and 31 order are still used by railroads in the 1970s, long after the telegraph had been removed. Abbreviation ES for and derives from Morse character and ampersand. The pro sign SK, where the numbers run together, derives from the Morse 30. Because 30 had other meanings, so SK sounds a lot like 30. Where the letters run together derives. Numeric code is a small part of abbreviations outlined in the Phillips code developed by telegrapher Walter P. Phillips. Here are the numbers as referenced. Wire signals, preference over everything except 95. 1, wait a moment. 2, important business. 3, what time is it? 4, where shall I go ahead? 5, have you business for me? 6, I am ready. 7, are you ready? 8, close your key, circuit is busy. 9, close your key for priority business, the wire chief, dispatcher, or etc. Number 10, keep this circuit closed. So the first 10, 1 through 10, are spoken for. No 11. 12, do you understand? 13, I understand. 14, what is the weather? 15, for you and other to copy. For you, intended recipient, and other to copy. So CC is allowed for carbon copy, in a sense. 16 not included. 17 lightning here. Imagine it has something to do with the weather, the missing 16. 18. What is the trouble? Very, very common on a railway line, but not like a railway wire line, the telegraph line. What's the trouble? 19, Form 19, train order. No 20. 21, stop for a meal. 22, wire test. 23, all copy. Interesting. 24, repeat this back. These are like troubleshooting orders. Not just troubleshooting, but also, error correction orders. To make sure that the message gets through correctly, you'd have to copy it back. Repeat this back. 25, busy on another wire. 26, put on ground wire. Presumably more secure. Probably won't be tapped as often. I'm not sure about that. 27, priority, very important. 28, did you get my writing? I guess also by train, huh? 29, private, deliver in sealed envelope. Top of the message. I guess you can put it in anywhere, but top of the message makes a lot of sense. 30, no more. And they were saying earlier in the article, this has more to do with press people than anybody. 31, Form 31 train order. So 19 and 31 are reserved for train business. 32, I understand that I am too. The phrase 32, I understand that I am too. 33, car report. Also answer is paid for. That's 33. 34, message for all officers. 35, you may use my signal to answer this. Where am I here? There we go. You may use my signal to answer this. There's an interesting one. What does that mean exactly? But to answer this. 37, diversion. Also inform all interested. No 36. No 38 either. 39, important with priority on through wire. Also sleep car report. 40 through 43, missing. 44, answer promptly by wire. 45 through 72, missing. 73, best regards. 74 through 87, missing. Love and kisses for 88. 89 through 90. 89 and 90, missing. 91, superintendent signal. 92, deliver promptly, which seems like that was on another one. But it isn't. 93, vice president and general manager signals. No 94, 95, president signal. And then an additional one at 134. Who is at the key? Good question, yeah? Who is at the key? Sounds almost Roman, that. So close and yet so far. Hey, I got my business done. I got my keyboard on my lap. I got my pen tab in front of me, and now I've got this for markup purposes. I also have a highlighter here, which is kind of nice. Wire test. And best regards. I like all copy too. 24 and 25. Busy on another wire. Yeah, I can't sketch quickly with this thing. I also get to like erase quickly. Like gonna want to use this thing tonight. Got a bunch of work done already is what I said earlier, right? I meant that. Sat down before I started and said to myself, Self, what do you intend to talk about later? Talk about or weigh in on. And it was very tempting to rebroadcast things tonight because it was an interesting day. A couple of interesting videos uploaded YouTube-wise, and I had an interesting link provided to me because I'd heard some of the rumor that indeed there were guns to be found or in Charlottesville in more hands than the media's were reporting about. So it's been an interesting day. What did I get at? Quite honest, I decided to have a little look at John Locke. This is John Locke over here. Here, I'll put it in blue so it's nice and easy to see. John Locke. Second treatise on government. Government cheese. Hey, I haven't tried everything on this thing yet either. Oh, yeah, that almost caused a crash. Wow. That's not very good. Second treatise on government. And the part that I got interested in is, I had a quick look, and I linked this earlier on my discussion tab on my channel. Chapter 5 in this particular book, the link's in the description, is of property. And I thought, well, hell, I could go through this for a while. I'm going to delete this stuff first and move this down a bit. And I've taken a series of notes already. I'm going to try to stick to my own notes here and perhaps not read out the entirety of this chapter. It goes from section 25 to section 51. Basically, one section is one paragraph. I would be better off just focus. I think I'm better off focusing on. I'm going to use red letter. I'm going to be focusing on. Maybe red won't work too well. Let's test it. Yeah, that'll work fine. Section 25, focusing on the keywords which I think stand out when I read it, and the reasons why I think it. One universal monarch. Right. I will not consent myself to answer that if it be difficult. Well, I better go back. Really, I've got to. But this being supposed, it seems to some a very great difficulty how anyone should ever come to have property, have a property in anything. I will not content myself to answer if that be difficult to make out property. If it be difficult to make out property, upon a supposition that God gave the world to Adam and his posterity in common, it's impossible that any man but one universal monarch should have any property upon a supposition that God did give the world to Adam and his heirs in succession, exclusive of all the rest of his posterity. But I shall endeavor to show how man could have come to have property in several parts, that which God gave mankind in common without any express compact, and without any express compact of the commoners. And that's the very last line of this verse and his main thrust of argument. And that without any express compact of the commoners. I.e., I got a question. I have a question. I'll put it in blue. I.e. without a written comma ratified Constitution, i.e. without a written ratified Constitution? And the answer to this question is yes. But one universal monarch, i.e. a constitutional monarchy, with problem areas to be found in the Commonwealth worldwide. So see also, I should probably undo both those. See also Commonwealth as a concept. Because, so again, i.e. yes, because of constitutional monarchy. The monarch itself, or the monarch themselves, as such, stands instead of a written document. The will of the monarch is held at bay by the actual parliament, which passes written laws and decrees and the like, at the sufferance of the sufferance and pleasure of the monarch, but also to tell the monarch what is good for the people because of what the commons say. Thus they call it the commons. They literally refer to the parliament in the British system as the commons for this reason. So there are problem areas in the Commonwealth worldwide where there are written constitutions that partly get in the way of this. Canada is one such place, although we don't generally talk anti-monarch here. Depending on where you are, they might. Other places stand out to my awareness include Australia, where there is, or at least seems to be, fairly strong anti-monarchical trend and they do have a written constitution, I believe. I might be wrong about that. If I'm wrong, tell me so. Let me know in a comment or in the chat. Section 26. God who given the world a man in common hath also given them reason. Hath also given them reason to make use of it to the best advantage of life and convenience. And a little bit later, I really should be using the highlighter here. I want a bigger highlighter. Nobody as originally a private dominion, exclusive of the rest of mankind, and in them as they are thus in their natural state. And nobody has originally a private dominion, i.e. all is given, all on earth is given in common in his mind. Plus this original proviso in the section, God who hath given the world dominion in common, hath also given them reason. Hath also given them reason. Make use of it to best advantage for the sake of life and convenience. Earth and all its therein is given to men for support and comfort of their being. I'm not entirely sure that passes the 19th and 20th centuries tests, though. I don't think people see it in that way, quite that way anymore. is given, and I'm not talking about the men part versus the female part or something. No, no, no. I mean in the sense that it's been given to, as opposed to we have arisen within a planet of plenty. And part of the 19th century's fascination with the plenty is that the population density had increased enough that competition had been brought into more sharp focus in terms of its selective power upon the population. And the power that the population exerted via selection upon the people who provided via, say, production. And though all the fruits it naturally produces, the beast it feeds, belong to mankind in common, as they are produced by the spontaneous hand of nature. Fair enough, as they are produced by the spontaneous hand of nature. And nobody is originally private domain or dominion, except exclusive of exclusive of the rest of mankind in any of them, as they are thus in their natural state. Yet being given for the use of men, there must be of necessity be a means to appropriate them in some way or another before they can be of any use or at all beneficial to any particular man. The fruit or venison which nourishes the wild Indian who knows no enclosure and is still a tenant in common must be his, and so is, i.e., a part of him. Property is a part of the person whose property it is. And this shouldn't be forgotten. This is a deeply held value that another can no longer have any right to it before it can do him any good for the support of his life. All right, I'll get to the next one. $27, yeah? Ooh. Totally, like, highlighter's the better one. Person has property in themselves. Yet every man has a property in his own person. Huh? In his own person. Intrinsic to him is property. Some property, some value. Here's the funny thing about Locke. I wouldn't call him mealy mouth, but he is weirdly given to calling this property in his own person. He means value added. I'm not kidding. He means value added. This nobody has the right to but him himself. The labor of his body, the work of his hands, we may say, are properly his. I'm going to put that in another color. Labor of his body. Nobody has any right to but himself. The labor of his body, the work of his hands, are properly his. Wherever then he removes out of the state that comes from that nature is provided, and left in it, he has mixed his labor with, and joined to it something that is his own, thereby making it his property. Joined to it something that is his own, and thereby makes it his property. I've also linked in the description P.J. Proudhon from the 19th century. P.J. Proudhon, who points out that in this, Locke is referring to the idea that it bears The stamp bears the stamp of its creator, this thing property. The thing that separates an apple which falls from a tree from an apple which falls from an orchard of trees that's being tended to, and this just some specific type of apple, is the stamp of its creator. I tried to pick out an argument there that I hadn't read somewhere else today there. I think that's as close to it as I can come to explaining. By extension, since a person has a property in themselves, by extension, common property becomes private, imbued with the person's property, i.e. the stamp of its maker or owner. But he also makes a double point in this section. It's at the bottom. It being by him removed from the common state nature is placed it in, he hath by his labor something annexed to it. He excludes the common right of other men. Something annexed to it. I found this funny when I read it. So what? Annexed to it. Something annexed to it. I said normally we think it's something being annexed by, at least me, Mr. Historian, when I've been doing historical research, it's one state annexing some other state. By this labor something annexed to it. It hath by this labor something annexed to it. That excludes the common right of other men. For this labor being the unquestionable property of the laborer, no man but he can have a right to what is once joined to, at least where there is enough. And here is the proviso, the First Amendment. And as good left in common for others. No man but he can have a right to what that is once joined to, at least where there is enough and is good left in common for others. I.e., the First Amendment at the end, take what you need and leave the rest. In other words, take what you need and leave the rest. I'm going to put that in this other window. If I need something to write in chat or text, I'll put it here. Take what you need and leave the rest. The band. I got a series of notes taken here. Section 28. Labor added the value. That labor put a distinction between them and common that added something to them more than nature, the common mother of all, had done, and so they became his private right. Proudhon's What is Property shows the same pair of ducks in better perspective, illustrating that property is both freedom and theft, depending on the type of labor or the means. So Proudhon, well, actually I have a quick read through this before I get to saying anything about Proudhon, but here we go. He that is nourished by the acorns he picked up under an oak or the apples he gathered from the trees. Oh, yeah, I did read about an apple. Has certainly appropriated them to himself. Nobody can deny, but the nourishment is his. I asked them, when did they begin to be his? When he digested them, when he ate them, when he boiled them, when he brought them home, or when he picked them up? And it is plain, in the first gathering made them not his, nothing. If the first gathering made him not his, nothing else could. The fact that he labored, the sweat of his brow or his arm or indeed maybe even his mind, to pursue this particular thing. And he'll go across this distinction many times. And if anyone say he had no right to the acorns or apples he thus appropriated, because he had not the consent of all mankind to make them his, because he had not the consent of all mankind to make them so, was it a robbery? Which is the argument that Proudhon is ready to take up. Thus to assume to himself what belonged to all in common. If such a consent was, as that was necessary, man had starved, notwithstanding the plenty God had given him. If every man had to have asked if every person had to have asked every other person for permission every time they were going to eat, mankind should have starved, waiting for such permission to be granted, is his point. Fair enough. Notwithstanding the plenty God had given him, which is the reason why no such starvation occurred, we see in commons, which remain so by compact, that is the taking any part which is of what is common, removing it out of the state nature leaves them, which begins the property. Which begins the property. You don't need to have the land to have property in the land. Fair? Without which the common is of no use, and the taking of this or that part does not depend on the express consent of all the commoners. Thus the grass my horse has bit, my turfs my servant has cut, the ore I have digged in any place where I have a right to them in common with others becomes my property. Without the assignation or consent of anybody, labor that was mine, removing them out of that common state they were in, hath fixed my property in them. In them. Not upon even, but in them. Locke focuses throughout this on the term consent, which can be royal in his case. This is the reason why he says he sees no reason for expecting or having to ask for consent and receiving it from everybody. Oh, am I being crazy? No, you'll see in a second. 29. By making an explicit consent of every commoner. Oh yes, by making an explicit consent of every commoner necessary to anyone's appropriating to himself any part of what is given in common, children or servants. Children or servants. So, okay, here we go. We're ready for this one. Children or servants could not cut the meat which their father or master has provided for them in common, without assigning to every one of his peculiar part. Without assigning to everyone his peculiar part. What does that mean? That's number one time that word has showed up, but he means it specifically. But father or master has provided for them in common without assigning for everyone his peculiar part. Though the water running in the fountain be everyone's, yet who can doubt but that the pitcher is his who drew it out? The pitcher which contains the water is the property boundary. The water in the pitcher now belongs to the person who owns the pitcher. His labor hath taken it out of the hands of nature, where it was common, and belonged equally to all her children, and hath thereby appropriated it to himself by making an explicit commitment being reiterated by Locke. That's my feeling. Hey, YouTube, I think I'm back. Got a bit of a bump there. Here we go. What's this saying? We're in the middle of doing Locke. Okay. I'll go with that one. I think this is a straw man argument by making an explicit consent of every commoner necessary to anyone's appropriating to himself any part which is given in common. Children or servants could not cut the meat which their father or master provided for them in common without assigning to everyone his peculiar part. By making explicit consent of every commoner. He is making a straw man argument, and it's reiterated here for the second time by Locke. Number one, I draw your attention to 3 words. I draw your attention to 3 or more words, but here's 3 words considered. Number one, okay, so A. 3 words, A. Referenda. B. Constitution. And C. Elections, because the commons moved from the land itself to a symbolic place on the inside of a building called Westminster, at least for the British. Is Locke being radically anarchistic by advocating for enlightened reason informed by the New Testament values that he holds? See also P.J. Proudhon. Once again, Proudhon is 100 years or more later. C.P.J. Proudhon. All right, because I don't have to stay onto this page. Referenda, Constitution, and elections. That's what these things, assigning to everyone his peculiar part, is what a constitution is all about. To some degree. Elections, sometimes, well, let's put it another way. What's the difference between a referendum and an election? Everyone gets a say in a specific question as opposed to everyone gets a say on an elected representative to answer specific questions in the manner of a referendum sometimes. But I'll tell you another peculiar word which exists in a parliamentary system. It's called a division. Because when a parliament votes, they don't use a referendum to do it. They use a division of the commons in a symbolic manner. That's how a vote occurs. Oh yes, and informed by the New Testament. Well, I might as well make this a sidebar while I'm at it then. See if this isn't going to cause a crash. Jeez, Buzz, what's been going on? Oh, wait now. I've been testing this. Yeah, this works great. Awesome. So we're going to take a little break from Locke here before I get back to the next one. I've got a little reading here from the Bible, because a little further down in Locke, we're going to come across a specific reference to verse 12 right here. Fight the good fight of faith, lay hold of eternal life, or on eternal life, whereunto thou art also called, and hath professed a good profession before many witnesses. Hath professed a good profession, I imagine is what he's meaning, before many witnesses. Hopefully if you're going to say this profession is true, the witnesses should be able to testify to the truth of the thing, and even so, I'd much prefer picks or get the fuck out, so to speak. Call me crazy. I'd like to go to the beginning of this reading. I think actually I made a note of this at the very beginning of my own notes. This entire thing comes from a Judeo-Christian perspective. See 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 1 through 15. And I started in the King James Version. And before I get into this, I'm going to mention a few details about Locke's early life and education. Where did Locke go to school? He went to a school in Westminster, like a prep school, what we would have for elementary and high school even, and then to Christ Church, Oxford. He joined the Royal Society sometime after that. He was contemporary with most of the early members of the Royal Society, knew Newton, later a friend of the Friends of Spinoza. So goodness only knows what he was doing. But one of the things he would have been expected to do would have been to have a religious training in order to serve in the role of a parish priest, if necessary. And thus, he goes immediately to 1 Timothy 6, 1 through 15, and we're going to look at two things in particular. We're going to read this 15 verses, and I'm going to compare it against 1 Timothy 6 from a New American Standard Bible. King James to New American Standard Bible. Maybe you'll see what I saw right away. Fuck it. I can't help but show what I saw right away. I'm going to. Red letter time. Let as many servants as are under the yoke, count their own masters worthy. Servants under the yoke. Guess what? I saw that in the King James Version. I said, you know what? That word servants is serf, and it really doesn't mean servant. It means slave. What do you see in the New American Standard Version? All who are under the yoke as slaves are to regard their own masters as worthy of all honor, so that the name of God and our doctrine will not be spoken against. Uh-oh. All who are under the yoke as slaves are to regard their own masters as worthy of all honor, so that this name of God and our doctrine will not be spoken against. Or else. I mean, the velvet glove of Paul. Those who have believers as their masters must not be disrespectful to them because they are brethren. Those who have believers as their masters must not be disrespectful to them because they are brethren, but must serve them as all the more, because those who partake in the benefit are believers and beloved. Teach and preach these principles. This is coming, I imagine, from Paul. What he calls principles. If anyone advocates a different doctrine, okay, these principles, if anyone advocates a different doctrine and does not agree with sound words, those of our Lord Jesus Christ, and with the doctrine conforming to godliness, he is conceited and understands nothing. I have to say to both, projection. Paul. Where's the principle in that? That's the principle. But he has a morbid interest in controversial questions and disputes about words, out of which arises envy, strife, abusive language, evil suspicions, and constant friction between men of depraved mind and deprived of the truth, who suppose that godliness is a means of gain. You know what is a means of gain? Mastery. Also usury or rent-seeking behavior, we could call it. Rent-seeking behavior. I think I heard it called that lately. But godliness actually is a means of great gain. Oh, when accompanied by contentment. For we have brought nothing into we have brought nothing into the world and cannot take anything out of it. If we have food and covering, with these things we should be content. If we have food and covering, with these things we should be content. It's not entirely untrue. However, I've observed some funny things in life involving these two. But those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare and many foolish and harmful desires which plunge men into ruin and destruction. Okay. For the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil. Some longing for it have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. But flee from these things, you men of God who pursue... Okay, but flee from these things, you men of God, and pursue righteousness. Okay, godliness, faith, love, perseverance, and gentleness. For the good fight of faith, which is the verse we read first, take hold of the eternal life to which you were called, and make the good confession. And you made the good confession in the presence of many witnesses. Funny, I take locks to mean your profession, or your good confession is your signs of increase in the real world. And the many witnesses are your brethren who partake of your bounty. That's how I read Locke, not Timothy or Paul. I charge you in the presence of God, who gives life of all things, and of Christ Jesus, who testified the good confession before Pontius Pilate. See? That if you keep the commandment without stain or reproach until the appearing of our Lord Jesus Christ, he will bring about the proper time. He will bring about the proper time. At the proper time, he who is the blessed and only sovereign, King of kings, Lord of lords, Savior extraordinaire, and who alone possesses immortality and alone possesses immortality. Because eternal life is that to which you're called, but you might not get there. I guess that's. Who alone possesses immortality and dwells in unapproachable light, whom no man has seen or can see. At least not now. To him is honor and eternal dominion. So for a moment here, that's the 15 verses. This is what Locke has been using some of the time, or what he's intending to use very soon. I'll remove the markup. Here is the King James Version. This is the one Locke would have been reading, more than likely. I'm not aware of any other Bible. I guess there was a. Well, it would have been the King James version. They that have believing masters, don't despise them because they are brethren, but rather do them service. Rather do them service. Or as the last one said, serve them all the more. Rather do them service because they are faithful and beloved. And they tithe, partakers of the benefit. These things teach and exhort. If any man teaches otherwise, consent not to wholesome words. Consent not to wholesome words. This is in a sense, this is where modern blasphemy comes from. We could think of blasphemy in the Old Testament sense of speaking directly against the name of God or against something which was made holy. The funny thing in the modern Canadian sense is that in Quebec, to blaspheme is to use some religious object as the thing that you're cursing, but you refer to it in a twisted or perverted way. Ma calice, as I understand it, as in my chalice. So that wholesome words, even the words of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the doctrine which is according to godliness, and the doctrine which is according to godliness. He is proud, knowing nothing, doting out questions of strife. I think he's actually referring inadvertently or obliquely to someone that Timothy might have asked him about. Knowing nothing, doting out questions and strifes of words. Yeah, you know why? Do you know why? Paul struck out. Paul didn't do too well in Athens either. Where a lot of the words came from. I'm being facetious. Whereof cometh envy, strife, railings, evil surmisings, perverse disputing, men of corrupt mind, destitute of the truth, supposing the gain is godliness. From such withdraw thyself. He does not say anything against usury. But godliness is contentment. But godliness with contentment is a great gain. I think you see where the value is for the Roman. Godliness with contentment. The Roman Paul, that's what he values. For we brought nothing into this world, and is certain we carry nothing out. Might be true, but you can inherit a great deal of wealth now, can't you, Paul? And having food and raiment, let us be there with content. For having food and raiment, having food and clothing alone. But that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil. It's the love of, right? While some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Something of a poet in that King James, what? But thou, O man of God, flee from these things, follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, and meekness. Follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness. Righteousness, I gotta really pick them apart a little bit here. Righteousness, see evil, right? Godliness, faith, love, patience. 3, love being charity. In other places in Paul. Patience, meekness. Like a lamb to the slaughter. Fight the good fight. Lay hold on eternal life, whereunto thou art also called, and hath professed a good profession before many witnesses. I think this is the more honest reading of this text. And hath professed a good profession before many witnesses, because it is the chapter title, the heading title, is To Ministers. And this is what it is. This is what it is. He's saying you've been a good preacher and minister to many witnesses who have donated much. Give thee charge in the sight of God, who quickeneth all things, and before Christ Jesus, who before Pontius Pilate witnessed a good confession. All of a sudden, Paul seems to be catching up with the story. Thou keep this commandment without spot. Oh, immaculate, unrebukable until the appearing of our Lord Jesus Christ, which in his times he shall shew, which is the word that Locke used at the beginning. Who is blessed and who is the blessed and only potentate, the King of kings and Lord of lords, who hath immortality, dwelling in the light which no man can approach unto, whom no man hath seen nor can see, to him whom be honor and power everlasting. Blah, blah, blah. So with spot, immaculate. With spot, the Scot. Akai, the news. Yeah, good little joke there, what? You got to really get into that one. So suffice it to say, that's my little backgrounder there on instructions to those who minister. That's what informs our friend Locke. That's what's been teaching him. That's what he's going to teach the populace. And his idea, as we saw at the very, very beginning, is that one universal monarch embodies the constitutional necessity of what makes this law, or what prevents the need of making an explicit consent of every commoner, or what provides for or against that necessity. I'm being honest here. What provides for or against that necessity? At the moment then and at the moment now, is the monarch's physical person. The actual monarchy, so all of their physical persons, the next in succession being the main thing. So, section 30. I might stop after this one and get back again to this at another point. But we'll see. Section 30. Thus the law of reason makes the deer of the Indians who hath killed it, and it is allowed to be his goods who had bestowed his labor upon it, though before it was common right of everyone. Amongst those who counted the civilized part of man, I've written down this as being the real thrust of this section. Amongst those who are counted the civilized part of mankind, who have made and multiplied positive laws to determine property, this original law of nature, for the beginning of property in what was before common, still takes place, and by virtue thereof, what fish one catches in the ocean, what great still remaining common of mankind, that great and still remaining common of mankind, or what ambergris one takes up here, is by the labor of the removal out of that common state nature left it in, made his property, who takes the pains about it. Okay. Two main thrusts here. We'll get to. I'm going to highlight this part, ambergris, and then I'm going to made and multiplied positive laws to determine property, this original law of nature. Made and multiplied positive laws. What does he mean by that? Amongst those who are counted a civilized part of mankind, who have made and multiplied positive laws, distinct from natural law. Oops, positive feedback. Here's where I would actually have a little small quibble with. Someone pointed this out to me. Someone pointed this out to me some time ago, and when it was pointed out to me, it occurred to me that I had known the difference and had forgotten it. Oh, positive feedback. Does not guarantee an equal or well-distributed outcome. What do I mean by that? Well, I've got to actually do a little quick listing. So I'll just use this area down here to do it. Ooh, shit. So here, I'm making a little quick listing here. Positive laws, by extension, there must be negative laws. But what does he mean by this positive law? It's distinct from natural law. This original is made and multiplied positive laws to determine property. This original law, which he means natural law. By that he means natural law is the law which determines property, who owns. The 9/10 of the law is the natural law. And then we have made and multiplied positive laws to determine property. This is a positive feedback loop which doesn't necessarily guarantee an equal or well-distributed outcome. But hang on a second. Sometimes this leads into a discussion of negative v positive rights. What would be examples of either one here? Over on this side, freedom of speech or expression. Freedom of life, as in self-defense, or private property. Because one is indeed considered to be the other in most negative natural situations. Freedom from crime or corruption. Which most of the time turns back into the freedom of life as a result of private property. This is by extension, crime or corruption. Freedom of religion is a later arising one. I'll put it over on this side, freedom of religion as well. Habeas corpus and a fair trial can be considered a negative right. I'm using an online source to determine this, although I see where it comes from. I can understand the argument, I think. Habeas corpus and a fair trial. As in, there's a presumption of innocence. That's a negative right. And also freedom from slavery. Depending on who you ask, because it appears John Locke can be a little bit mealy-mouthed about that. Since he argued just a little while ago about, what was it about the father? Some shit about the father? Oh wait, it was the peculiar bit. Right, the peculiar stuff. Right. The peculiar. What's the positive rights? What would be a positive rights listing? Okay. Police protection by the state. As opposed to by private enterprise or your wallet. Right to state provided, I should just mention that they're all going to be related to the state. State provided legal counsel, as in legal aid of some kind. I'm going to switch over to green here. Right of access. Access to, oh, maybe red would be better. Access. What do you mean access? Education. This is really the longest listing of all. Housing. Standard of living. Healthcare. I.e., this is the general listing for, I'm going to put down health there. Maybe it's not a coincidence I'm using red to do this and my camera's half covering it up, but access as in, if you're going to aim for equality, it's equality of access, not equality of outcome. Correct? And yeah, don't forget, I've positively identified what makes this a negative right. Because there's a presumption of innocence in a fair trial. These are generally included, these positive rights generally included on human rights documents. I'm going to put that down up here. See also. Universal. Human rights. Those are positive. They are posited upon the legislative power of both national and international organizations. That's what they're posited upon. And what makes them positive? Hey, but hang on here. That's only part one. There's a second part. I'll use the green again. Or what ambergris that he takes up here is by the labor that removes it out of that common state nature left it in. What does he mean by that? What is ambergris? Why, a product from sperm whales. Comes from sperm whaling. I thought first it came from the head, but apparently it's found in the stomach of the whales, which requires quite a bit of work, I imagine. And made his property who takes the pains about getting it. Right? See, also, it was at this point when I was reading this through, I thought, oh wow, of course, dominionism. Sperm whales, ambergris, would be the type of thing which is used in a coronation service. If a person was going to be blessed or anointed, as a monarch might be in a ceremony to make them a king or queen, ANNOIN, that type of thing might be used as the oil to put on their head or their face or their hands. They'd use an oil too sometimes, but ambergris as an application upon the forehead is also generally used. Bishops sometimes carry that kind of thing. The bigger the bishop, the more likely. The same as the bigger the whale. But yeah, this is frankly bordering on dominionism. And the monarch features heavily in this entire idea. No man's private possession. Okay, so even looks upon, even though amongst us the hare that anyone is hunting is thought to be his who pursues her during the chase, for being a beast that is still looked upon as common and no man's private possession. Whenever he's employed so much labor about any of that kind as to find and pursue her, has thereby removed her from the state of nature wherein she was common, this hare, and hath begun a property of her. Which is, you know, the standard application of trying to show that the division of the mark of the mark of the person who has the property is to make that which was femininely under the aegis of Mother Nature, thus her, has now become his, and therein the property resides. Whatever. And again, I'm not trying to prove anything the feminists are saying here. All I'm saying is this is Locke's peculiar way of going about it because of the biblical crap, which frankly holds it back. Section 31, the objection of engrossment. Perhaps be objected to this, that if gathering acorns or any other fruits of the earth and etc. makes a right of them, then anyone may engross as much as he will. To which I answer, not so. Well, that's easy for you to say, Locke. That's easy for you to say in the 17th and early 18th century. Very easy for you to say. Some law of nature, same law, that does by means give us property, does also bound the property too. Oh, that's funny. We're gonna have our cake and we're gonna eat it too, are we? What does he mean by that? I'll put this down. Proto-mercantilism, where the whole idea is that there's a pie, and the pie can only be divided so much before you run out of what any given group's going to be able to get. You got to pick these colors, right? There's only so much available. So anyone starts to encroach on someone else's boundary is going to literally be taking from them. God has given us all things richly. Given us all things richly. 2 Timothy 2, or 2 Timothy 6, verse 12. Or, sorry, 1 Timothy 6, verse 12. Is the voice of reason confirmed by inspiration? What? I don't necessarily follow that. Is the voice of a Roman who would rather people weren't revolting. That's what he says is one thing, I say is another. Voice of reason confirmed by inspiration, I disagree. That's a strike. So I say, voice of a Roman. Who doesn't like what? Upheaval. He's not only a Roman, true, but he is also a Roman. The objection of engrossment, i.e. gluttony and greed, number one contention by the late 20th century. See Milton Friedman and also Arnold Schwarzenegger. And this is also take what you need and leave the rest, part 2. Because this is the problem. This is what it's becoming. Proto-mercantilism, where the idea is you take what you need and you leave the rest, but what happens when everybody has already taken what they think they need? How far has he given it us to enjoy? As much as anyone can make use of, to any advantage of life before it spoils. If it spoils, what good is it? So much may his labor be to fix a property in. So much as he may by his labor fix a property in. Whatever is beyond this is more than his share. Whatever is beyond his ability to do it is more than his share and belongs to others. Nothing was made by God for man to spoil or destroy. Thus, considering the plenty of natural provisions there was for a long time in the world, and so few spenders, and to how small a part that provision the industry of one man could extend itself, and how small a part of that provision the industry of one man could extend itself. That has changed. That changed, and it changed in the 16th, 17th, 18th, and then 19th centuries. The 17th especially, the 18th particularly, not peculiarly, but particularly. And it is called, you might have guessed it, which is like in. Another form of constitution, really. Again, right? Another way of saying that word is this, in a way. We refer to our body's constitution in the same sense. The thing which informs the corpus. The thing which, if not informs it, which measures its health. what constitutes it. To engross to the prejudice of others, especially keeping within the bounds set by reason what might serve for his use. Therefore could be then little room for quarrels or contentions about the property so established, so provided he doesn't take more than he needs and leaves the rest. So again, we get an echo of the band here. Night they drove old Dixie down. Section 31. I'm going to take a quick break here, but I hope you're digging this. I'll keep the notes on the stage, or on the stage. I'll keep the notes on the screen while I take my break. I noticed too there a while back, friggin' old, I'll keep that up. This thing crashed once already. Just be careful. Be right back. Yeah, still up. Great. Wonderful. Perfect. Excellent. I got a bit of tea brewing in the background there. So, where was I at? Section 31, right? Section 32. I'll go back to the pen. Oh, I like the pen. Dang. Should have done this years ago. Section 32. The earth itself. But the earth itself. Again, I shouldn't have wiped out the thing, but I'm going to put this down over here. Proto. It's almost as if it's proto-mercantilism in the sense that he recognizes the chief matter of property being now not the fruit of the earth and the beasts that subsist on it, but the earth itself, as that which takes in and carries with it all the rest, as in, this is the frame of reference, the entire frame of reference. Sheesh. Entire frame of reference. I think it plain and property too is that acquired as a former, as much land as a man tills, plants, improves, cultivates. So man tills, plants, improves, cultivates, and can use the product of it. So much is his property. He, by his labor, does, as it were, enclose it from the commons. Nor will it invalidate his right. Blah, blah, blah. Hang on a minute. Oy, oy, yo. Shucks. Man, I love tea. Tea is the stuff. I'm a Tetley tea drinker, like all the way. I don't need anything more fancy than that. My gosh, Tetley. Oh. Nor will it invalidate his right to say everybody else has an equal title to it and therefore cannot appropriate. Let's go through this again. Nor will it invalidate his right to say everybody else has an equal title to it. Nor will it invalidate his right to say everyone else has an equal title to it, and therefore cannot appropriate, he cannot enclose without the consent of all his fellow commoners, all mankind. Nor will it invalidate his right. I'm going to mark this because it switch between this and then the positive statement which follows. Oh, sorry, he cannot enclose without the consent of all of his fellow commoners, all mankind. Nor will it invalidate his right to say this. God, when he gave the world in common to all mankind, commanded men also to labor. Oh. Here comes the next red line. Commanded men also to labor, and the penury of his condition required it of him. He couldn't merely take from the earth, he had to labor in order to truly take from the earth. And if he did labor, then it was his. God and his reason commanded him to subdue the earth. God and his reason. Strangely, we have here a very modern rendition of a very old idea, which is to take something which mankind apparently has, reason, and to ascribe it to God himself. So I'm going to put down a word in the sidebar. He makes a fetish of this by ascribing it to a deity. This is what fetishizing means. Some people don't like having this marked out, but I'm going to double underscore it by now recoloring a second word. I'll color it in blue. Right here. Cultivates. That's right. Cultivates. That is that's a Roman term. That is a straight-on Roman, in fact, Etruscan term. I can go as far as say it's Etruscan, I think. If not Etruscan, I'd be very shocked, I think. Here's the red line. I'm going to put a mark here by it. Commanded him to subdue the earth, to improve it for the benefit of life. That's cultivation. And therein lay out something for it, or upon it, that was his labor. He that in obedience to this commandment of God subdued, tilled, or sowed any part, thereby annexed to it something that was his property, the stamp of its creator, which another had no title to, nor could, without injury, take from him. So here, as I had said when we went over the listing a little bit earlier, about private property and one's person, you may not deprive a person of his private property without injuring that person. Here is the if you can't call the law itself, or the authority that makes this a law, here is the statement which formalizes what was commonly held to be true, at least when it comes to the lords and the ladies, I guess. And it's the best way for me to put it. It's under section 32. Oh no, section 33 is the next one. Section 32, the earth itself. This is essentially, I've put down once again. Wait, I had a word put down more than once. Dominionism. Oh, I like this. Even like with a sense of overlay there. Great. Get out your red, blue glasses in case you haven't already. We can have some real fun now. Section 33. I am going to try using my eraser this time. Fetish I can keep over here on the side. How about I keep writing? I might as well keep going. See how far I can make this work. Section 33. Enough was left for the rest. Since there was enough. Might as well read this. Nor was this appropriation of any parcel of land by improving any prejudice to another man, since there was still enough and as good left over, and more than yet provided could use. So that in effect it was never the less left for others because of the enclosure for himself. There was never less left for others because of the enclosure of some common bit of property. You'll see why in a short while. For he that leaves as much as another can make use of does as good as take nothing at all. Fair? I think this is a fair point. I'll mark it a different color. For he that leaves as much as another can make use of does as good as take nothing at all. Nobody could think himself injured by the drinking of another man, though he took a good draught, and had a whole river of the same water left him to quench his thirst. Case of land and water where there is enough of both is perfectly the same as the case, I guess, of any other kind of property is this point. Enough is left for the rest. Funny how relativism creeps in from time to time, right? It's funny how there's a touch of relativism in this from time to time. Here is a section with a very small dab of relativism in it. I'm going to put down relativism. Oh. Or at least relative. Since there was still enough and as good left, and more than yet unprovided could use. Relatively speaking, the little bit that he enclosed did not take anything away from anybody else, and in fact, if he could make good improvement on that little bit that he took, is an argument which he's going to get to, there may indeed be more than enough to go around, with some provisos. Section 34. God gave the world to men in common. It might be common, but uncultivated. Lulz. God gave the world to men in common. I'm going to go back to green. But since he gave it to them for their benefit and the greatest conveniences of life they were capable to draw from it, cannot be supposed he meant that it should remain common and uncultivated. Cannot be supposed that he meant it should always remain common and uncultivated. He gave it to the use of the industrious and the rational, and their labor was to be his title on it, and to it, not to the fancy or covetousness of the quarrelsome and contentious, which is a direct reference back to Timothy, or the letter 1 Timothy. He that had as good left for his improvement as was already taken up needed not complain, ought not to meddle with what was already improved by another's labor. If he did, it is plain he desired the benefit of another's pains which he had no right to, and not the ground which God had given him in common with others to labor on, whereof there was as good left as that already possessed, and more than he knew what to do with. So he is making a direct reference back to 1 Timothy. This is the sort of thing that you say to the people who can't make good witness to their profession. Yeah, it's simpler for me not to use the, I'll scrub it instead. Might be common, but uncultivated. And to which I say lulls. Given for the use of the industrious and the rational, which I marked earlier. Property disputes being glossed over here. What are the children, John? I mean, really, what about the kids? But what about the children, John? All right. Section 35. It is true, he says, that land that is common in England or any other country, where there is plenty of people under government who have money and commerce, in land that is common in England or in any other country where there is people of plenty under government, or is plenty of people under government who have money and commerce, no one can enclose or appropriate any part without the consent of his fellow commoners, because there is left common by compact, i.e. by the law of the land, positive right, or positive law. Positive law as opposed to natural law. I might as well mark that this way, which is not to be violated. Though it be common in respect of some men, as it is not so to all mankind, but is joint property of the country. Is joint property. Oh boy, I gotta mark that in green. Joint property of this country or this parish. And though it be common in respect of some men, it is not so to all mankind, but joint property of this country or this parish. Besides this, or the remainder after such enclosure, would not be as good to the rest of the commoners, as the whole, when they could all make use of the whole, whereas in the beginning, the first peopling of the great common of the world, it was quite otherwise. Again, I've been saying over here on the sidebar, proto-Merc. The law man was under, I'm going to go red, was rather for appropriating. The law man was under, was rather for appropriating. God commanded, and his wants forced him to labor. That's natural law. That was his property which could not be taken from him wherever he had fixed it, and hence subduing or cultivating the earth, having dominion, we see are joined together. The one gave title to the other, so that God, by commanding to subdue, give authority so far as to appropriate, the condition of human life which requires labor and materials to work on necessarily introduces private possessions. Condition of human life, requiring labor and material. I marked it up. They're back and forth in two different colors and purpose. This is Dominionism in England circa the 17th century. 17th, early 18th. So I'm going to put a little arrow over here. Circa 17th to 18th century. It's going to change when the 18th century hits. It's going to change big time, and John Locke won't be able to stay in England until, like, he's going to be out of England by the 18th century. He'll have been forced to leave England because things in this dominion idea of his are going to be shaken up a little bit in terms of what the laws men are under. The late 17th century. What kind of words might we find here stemming from Locke then? Well, I can start writing them down on the screen here. Over here, let me see. Eminent domain comes from here. And hence subduing or cultivating the earth and having dominion, we see are joined together. I might also say, see usury. Or if I wanted to be really generous, rent seeking behavior. This necessarily introduces private possessions. And I also started thinking some funny numbers. When I got to this part, I started thinking some funny numbers. I'm going to write down the funny numbers I started thinking. Eminent domain is 9/10 of the law. This is where this idea possession is 9/10 of the law comes from. The other 1/10. If this is 9/10 of the law, where does the 1/10 go? Where's the remaining 1/10 go? Oh, right here. Here's where the other 10th goes. And what do I mean when I say that? So God, by commanding to subdue, I'm going to write this down on the screen as well. So by commanding to subdue, he means 1/10 at least. That's what he means. You don't believe me? That's why I'm saying rent-seeking behavior. Rent-seeking behavior. This will be really fun to watch later. Section 36. Christ, this thing's just going to get longer and longer, isn't it? I got all the time in the world, though. Section 36. Measure of property nature has well set by the extent of man's labor and the conveniences of life. I might as well use a bigger mark. Oh, I've got this one called, I got a name for this section. I remember it already. Section 36. We might as well refer to this always as this from here on. This has been easily demonstrated for well over 100 years, this as being a fallacy. And yeah, Marx did not demonstrate the fallacy here, if that makes you feel better. I can show you where I think the fallacy is. Locke's fallacy with an owl and an ox. Oh, wow. Can I make an owl? Can I make an owl? Here we go. Something like that. Had not the invention of money and the tacit agreement of men to put value on it. Oh wow, my goodness, it's right at the back, it's right at the bottom. Yeah, we'll see some more shoeing in a minute. I gotta get all the way down to the bottom here to get at the fallacy, to get at the fail. I'll try to go between red and green. Oh. Means property nature is well set the extent. The measure of property nature has well set by the extent of man's labor and the conveniences of life. No man's labor could subdue or appropriate all. Really? Really? No man's labor could subdue or appropriate all, depending on how you look at it. Nor could his enjoyment consume more than a small part. That's probably true, depending on what his enjoyment really is and how big his household happens to be. There's more than one way of looking at this peculiar question. This is a peculiar question or a peculiar statement he makes. Maybe I ought to mark that out too. To consume more than a small part. Let's say this is peculiar. That was impossible for any man. Oop, I need that one and it bigger. Possible for any man this way to entrench upon the right of another, to acquire to himself a property as to prejudice of his neighbor. As to prejudice of his neighbor, he would still have room for as good as large a possession after others had taken out his as before it was appropriated. To entrench on the right of another, to acquire himself a property to the prejudice of his neighbor, he would still have room for as good as large a possession after the other has taken out his, after the other the first, before it was appropriated. This measure did not, or did confine every man's possession to a very moderate proportion. This measure did confine every man's possession to a very moderate proportion. I guess this measure, he means something that God did confine every man's possession to his very moderate proportion, such that he might appropriate to himself without injury to anybody in the first ages of the world when men were more in danger to be lost, wandering from their company, and then the vast wildernesses of the earth then to be straitened for want of room to plant in. And this same measure may be allowed still without prejudice to anybody as far as the world seems, for supposing a man or family or in a state where they were first populating in the world by the children of Adam or Noah, let him plant in some inland vacant places of America. We shall find that the possessions, let him plant in some inland vacant places of America. We shall find, here we go, and we shall find that the possessions he could make for himself, upon the measures we've given, would not be very large, nor even to this day prejudice the rest of mankind, to give them reason to complain, think themselves injured by this man's encroachment, though the race of man have now spread themselves to all corners of the world, do infinitely exceed the small numbers there was at the beginning. Nay, the extent of ground is of so little value. Nay, okay? Nay, the extent of ground is of so little value without labor that I've heard it affirmed in Spain, man may be permitted to plow, sow, and reap without being disturbed upon land which he has no title to, only his own making use. But on the contrary, the inhabitants which themselves beholden to him by his industry on neglected and consequently waste land has increased the stock of corn which they wanted. But this be this as it will, which I lay no stress on, this I dare boldly affirm that the same rule of propriety, that every man should have as much as he could make use of, would hold still in the world without straitening anybody. Each man should have as much as he could make use of himself, and himself only, would hold still in the world without stressing anybody, since there is land enough in the world to suffice double the inhabitants. Safe bet, had not the invention of money and tacit agreement of men to put a value on it introduced by consent larger possessions and a right to them, which is now done, I shall by and by show more at large. Had not the invention of money, to which I responded, when I saw this part, had not the invention of money. I said, what? What about labor? He says the invention of money is something which had acted negatively. There should be enough in the world to suffice double the inhabitants, had not the invention of money and tacit agreement of men to put a value on it, i.e. on land. A monetary value on land. Find that possessions, some inland vacant places would find that the possession he could make himself, the measures that we given would not be very large, nor even this day prejudice the rest of mankind. Here's a question for you, and a question which the 18th and 19th century actually got into answering. What alternatives are there to this thing? And to be quite honest, could that exist without labor? can't be divorced from this. In some ways, you can't make labor happy without that. Strangely, he doesn't talk about the Gospel of John. And the parable of the vineyard. Wherein Jesus tells a story. Jesus decides to have a little bit of a sit down with his disciples or whoever else is the hangers on at the moment. While they're sitting around, he tells them like a parable which involves some particular. It involves a really limited number of characters. But here they are. There is a guy who owns a vineyard, and at the beginning of the day, he sends word out, or he goes out to the front gate, I guess, of the vineyard and says, "Hey, I'm looking for workers," and there are people gathered around to be workers. And he hires a few. He hires a few people, volunteer, and he says, "Yes, you get to work." And away they go into the vineyard, and they start working early in the morning. And then some hours later, say around noontime, the guy who owns the vineyard, he goes around and he notices he needs more workers. So he goes out to the gate of the vineyard again, finds a few more of these itinerant workers standing around doing nothing, says, "Hey guys, I need some work. Need some workers." And when he gets 3 or 4 more volunteers, and he goes, "Yeah, okay, you, and they all go to work in the vineyard." And then about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when there's only 2 more hours of the day left, after working a full day in the vineyard himself with all of these workers he's been hiring, vineyard guy notices he's still going to need a couple more workers in order to finish the day's labor and to really get it done. So he goes out to the gate of his vineyard and he says, "Hey, I need workers." And there's some itinerant workers standing around, thumbs up their asses, doing whatever it is they do. And they volunteer, and he goes, "Okay, I need you, and get to work." They all go to work. Then at the end of the day, the guy who owns the vineyard calls all of these workers together, the ones that he hired in the morning, the ones he hired at noon, the ones he hired at the end of the day, and pays them all the exact same rate. He gives them all the same day's wage, regardless of how long they've been working. Now I ask you, who here is going to complain about the deal? I ask you, who is going to complain about the fairness of the vineyard owner's wage? And if you want to look further into this, you should probably take it up with Jesus. Probably go to the Gospel of John and have a look there. The more organized the labor, the more likely the workers themselves will take exception to the landowner, to the vineyard owner, who devalues their labor by paying somebody too much for too little. Strange thing, of course, about that particular gospel parable is, hey, at the time and for several hundred years around that time, there had been a common money market. Well, yeah, there had been a common money market. For lack of better description, there had been a common money market among the Mediterranean nations who were seafaring, and those connected by seafaring culture. Consequently, there was many coins being struck using silver. And if you were in one end of the Mediterranean or in the other end of the Mediterranean, a single piece of silver might have been enough, should have been enough. That's the real way of putting this. Should have been enough to pay for your daily requirement of food and lodging, if you had to pay for lodging. a single silver coin, a shekel, if you will, or a drachma, if you'd rather. A day's wage, in other words, was a single coin, and to be paid that day's wage at the end of the day for having done so little work might indeed frustrate the people who've been working all day long, when they could have gotten away with getting in by the nose at the end, so to speak. Oh, it's an interesting discussion. What? On land, or really on property? I'm looking at this as I go along. I shall shew more and more at large by and by. My, that's a lie. Hey, 37. Section 37. I wish I could show you my really, really nice handwritten notes here, because I've been working off of my handwritten notes. That little piece of yellow metal. This is the major theme of this entire section. You might note this is the first section that has a double paragraph. 2 paragraphs in one section, where mostly up to now it's been a single paragraph, and that was enough. For gold, we get a double paragraph. And by extension, coinage, or money. Why is it that money must exist and is going to have to exist if Locke's all important labor is going to be taken into account? Or, put it another way, if Locke's all-important virtuous labor is going not so much be taken into account, but is going to be reasoned with and, how to put it, not only going to be reasoned with, but is going to come to, not a consensus, but come to an agreement with whoever thinks they... whoever the person who is the proprietor is. Because frequently the labor is not the same person as the proprietor. The little yellow gold, little yellow pieces of metal. So easy for Locke to discount those. A little piece of yellow metal. Don't forget silver. British pound is silver. This is certain that in the beginning, before the desire of having more than man needed to altered the intrinsic value of things which depended only on their usefulness in the life of man, or had agreed that a little piece of yellow metal which would keep without wasting or decay should be worth such a great piece of flesh, the whole heap of corn, though men had a right to appropriate by their labor each one to himself, of himself as much as of the things of nature as he could use, yet this could not much, nor to the prejudice of others, where the same plenty was still left to those who would use the same industry. Which is essentially a summation of everything we've been talking about up to now, or everything that he's been working towards up till now. Where same was left to each who would use the same industry. The essential fairness of the exchange is what he's trying to show here. That a little piece of yellow metal. To which let me add that he who appropriates land to himself by his labor does not lessen. To this let me add that he who appropriates land to himself by his labor does not lessen, that's truth, but increase the common stock of mankind. Gracious, he makes a good point there. Does not lessen, but increase common stock of mankind for the provision excuse me, for provisions serving the support of human life produced by 1 acre of enclosed and cultivated land are, to speak much within compass. Gracious me. Here we go. I have to finish what I'm doing before I can really do what I'm going to do here now, aren't I? Much within compass. What does he mean by that? Grace, I tell you, I'm going to mark that first with the red, so I got red ready. Okay. I don't offer profanity alert. Profanity alert is below me. Below me. This is sideways while I finish what I'm doing. Before I really do what I'm going to do, you know what I mean? Here we go. Below me. I'm a Mystery Science Theater fan. I really am. And one of my favorite episodes is Prince of Space. I've already done a video on it, I think, or streamed some of it. Prince of Space is funny as hell. Funny as heck. Bite me. As opposed to below me. To speak much within compass. You don't necessarily have to get triggered by the word compass. That's what I'm trying to say here. That's what I'm trying to get spit out. Being triggered by a word like compass is a little too easy. It's tough sometimes to it's tough to avoid the triggering. But to speak much within compass, I think what he means by this is that if we have a unit measure, that's been proposed. If we were to measure what this size is, this is some value x, which equals the increase in total, right? Whatever that total is, to speak much within the boundary of whatever this value is to say 10 times more for this 1 acre of enclosed and cultivated land, to speak much within compass, as I get back to do 10 times more than those which are yielded by an acre of equal richness lying waste in common. I'll put this in green merely to distinguish that there's another area being talked about. What's he saying? He speaks truth. I think he speaks truth. This 1 acre of enclosed and cultivated land to speak, much within compass produces 10 times more than those which are yielded by an acre of land of equal richness weighing in common. So I colored them both green here in the end. Here's 1 acre of enclosed and cultivated. Ah, right. That's why I really wanted a different color here. Here's cultivated land, enclosed and cultivated. Equal richness lying in waste in common. Therefore, he that encloses land and has greater plenty of the conveniences of life from 10 acres, than he could have from 100 left to nature. If he were to grab up 100 in nature, he'd get the same bounty as he'd get from 10 if he worked them. It might truly be said to give 90 acres to mankind. I follow his math here. Since he can get from 10 as he could have gotten from 100, if he avoids the engrossment, the urge for engrossment, then he could be said to give 90 acres to mankind, especially if he means to show 9 other men how to do the same, or 9 other people. Who cares? For his labor now supplies him with provisions out of 10 acres, which were but the product of 100 lying in common. I have here rated the improved land. I'm going to color this in blue. I have here rated the improved land very low, in making its product but 10 to 1, much within compass, when it is much nearer to 100 to 1. For I ask, whether in the wild woods and uncultivated wastes of America, uncultivated wastes, left to nature, without any improvement, tillage, or husbandry, 1,000 acres yield to needy and wretched inhabitants as many conveniences of life as 10 acres. It's 1,000 to 10, or 100 to 1. So saith the preacher. A Dulce Vita. Whether in the wild woods, uncultivated wastes of America, left to nature without any improvement, tillage, or husbandry, 1,000 acres yield the needy and wretched inhabitants as many conveniences of life as 10 of equally fertile lands in Devonshire, where they are well cultivated. That's my coloring job done. Cultivated, cultivated, cultivated. Cultivated. Pabst Blue cultivated. 37. Hey John, these little pieces of yellow metal, they weigh so much, man. They weigh so much. Little message to John there. I had to make sure I had the camera turned on. Improvement and profit margins versus, yeah. Here's the argument for improvement and profit margins. And I'm going to draw attention to his numbers right now. He says 10 to 1, first, much within compass. Right? He says 10 to 1 first, and then he says much nearer to 100 to 1. And I'll offer you that if we want to remember these two numbers, one way to do that is to label them blocks self-admitted margin of error. Very interesting rate that he's picked. It's like it's on a logarithmic scale. 1 to 10 to 100, and then and then to 1,000, which he implies from the statement. 1,000 acres yield the needy and wretched inhabitants. Logarithmic. I had to think about that. I don't know much about mathematics, and to be quite honest, I don't know much more than what I learned in regular education up to the high school level. Did some in university and found it unsatisfying in the very first years, which kept me away from it when I probably would have enjoyed it more had I kept on with it. However, later in life, coming back to it and enjoying it for the sheer pleasure, so to speak, gives me from time to time interesting interests. Like this one. What to make of a logarithmic scale or where to use one. This is an interesting point to me. Locke's self-admitted margin of error is on a logarithmic scale. Don't make the mistake. He's pretty modern in his thinking. And part of the reason for this is his Cartesian influences, I think. He called it much within the compass. To speak much within compass. Yeah, I've marked off something. I'm going to have to erase some of this, and I'll just use the highlighter to get back down at it. This is Locke's self-admitted margin of error. I'm consulting my own notes, so I'm going to be careful about this. I've been thinking about popping the joke on this one right now. Because this is logarithmic, when we convert it back to real numbers, okay, this 10 to 1 thing. Watch. I'm wondering where I can do it and get the most out of it. Here. Oh, I could use a rectangle of some kind, couldn't I? I don't want to erase everything. I just want to erase this little bit. Oh, that's the wrong one. Here we go. 10 to 1, 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1. Let's say we're making a bet, you and I. If I get 1,000 to 1, how much do I have in the end? If I get 10 to 1 and I win, how much do I have in the end? Do I get 10 back or do I have 11? Because sometimes you get back what you had because it was already yours. And that's the case with the land. What he's talking about is the rate of increase you get against two equal parcels of land. So I ask you, when he talks about his fractions later, is this not more accurate? 1/11ths, 1/101ths, or 1/1001ths? Because that's the real nature of the increase. To some degree, there's an intrinsic value of the thing itself, plus the thing you're getting back because of your labor having cultivated it. Or is one, put it bluntly and shortly, what's the value of 1 to 1 between the cultivated and uncultivated common land? Common land. Does it matter more that it's English or foreign? That's what I'm asking. From some other area, like the wildernesses of America. This being marked out, or okay, I'll use the highlighter next. I use red too, big wide one. For the appropriation of land, he who gathered as much of the wild fruit caught, killed, or tamed as many of the beasts as he could, he that so improved the pains of any of the spontaneous products of nature in any way, altered them from the state from which nature put them in, by placing his labor on them, to thereby acquire a property in them. But if they perished in his possession without their due use, without being spent, is another way that he puts this. Without being spent. If the fruits rotted or the venison putrefied before he could spend it, because it is social credit, this his labor can be transferred in property to some person other than him. It has value to somebody else. And this is the real value he will get, depending on his social status. Not only that, but this scale, this logarithmic scale, works differently depending on social status, because of where you are in the scale, I imagine. The number of shares you have, for example. Before he could spend it, he offended against the common law of nature and was liable to be punished. He invaded on his neighbor's share, for he had no right farther than his use called for any of them. They might serve to afford him the conveniences of life. I made a little note here in my notes about this, which is to say, here he talks about spoilage, what is sometimes pithily referred to as spoilage. I'll put it right on top. And almost by extension, demurrage. which in modern context means much more than the goods themselves or the spoilage which occurs in proper goods belonging to somebody. For whatever reason, they belong to this other person, and if they do not get consumed or go to waste or spoil, this is something liable to be punished. Are offences to Locke's common law, if it be due to stockpiling by a glutton or before he would spend it. So, and this is barter value. I ought to make that really clear. This tense thing, this is barter value. This is what the value you're going to get in barter arrangements. There's no coinage necessary for this arrangement, but this is the value you get. So that's my contention. What you originally put into it will have that much value against what you currently have. Cost of the bet, overall outcome. This is also, I've got down here something else, meta trade. This is a question, as I perceive it, I think this is a question then between barter and meta trade, which relies on this stuff. Someone's current money, and by implication, someone's coinage, because it bears the stamp and speaks directly of whose property it is and who's put the property in it. Nice and clear, nice and simple. Good. Yeah, might as well be nice and thorough here. It's not much more to go. When we're getting up toward 40 soon, hey look. Here's the one I've been looking forward to. I'll put it right across the top of the window because now's the time. The time is now. Oh. Ah, wonderful. Dang. Auto joins, look. Peculiar. Section 38. Same measures govern the possession of land. 2. Response in advance. Oh, right, because I'd already started looking up and figuring out what peculiar was going to mean. I might as well blow the whole wad, so to speak. Etymology, peculiar, here in the search bar. I'm not going to do one, but I'll write the word. Etymology. I knew to look this up. I checked the Etruscan first and didn't find a reference in my I didn't find a listing for it in my reference of choice at the moment. However, I did find the etymology of it, which told me it comes from Latin. It's got straight Latin roots, And my original sense before I checked the etymology of it was that it would refer, that most uses of the word peculiar would be in reference to one's nose. And it's not because the word pecus has anything to do with a nose. But I mean to say, the context of them, it's a peculiar odor we talk about. Do we know why? And it's a more likely, we're more likely to use the word peculiar in reference to smell, I think, almost by not knowing why. Comes from Latin. Peculiaris. I see how to get around the U problem. Of one's own property, according to the dictionary I checked. Also, peculium. Peculium. Private. Literally private property. And the root, pecu, meaning no, I shit you not, cattle or flock. I'm positive after I looked up the etymology, it means something to do with one's nose when we talk about a peculiar odor or odor. And the peculium refers to the enclosure, to the thing which has been marked off from the common. So this is a Latin arrangement. Some peculiar landowner or sheep herder or another cannot keep his increasing stock without starving himself and his land or his household. True. Cannot keep his increasing stock value without starving himself and his land or his household. That's true. Because Latin. Because Rome. Let's read it. This is weird. I mean, it's weird, but it's because he doesn't talk about where he got the word, right? Same measures govern the possession of land too, wherever he tilled and reaped, laid up and made use of, before it spoiled. That was his peculiar right. Whatever he enclosed and could feed and make use of, the cattle and product, was also his. But if either the grass of his enclosure rotted in the ground, or the fruit of his planting perished without gathering and laying up, this part of the earth, notwithstanding his enclosure, was still to be looked on as waste, and might be the possession of any other. You cannot steal waste, in short. And to which I would have to say, I suppose the lot will have to keep. Suppose the lock will have to keep honest men quote, honest men, honest. Since I know full fucking well that there are many supermarkets that put locks on their dumpsters. And would call it theft since you broke the lock. Thus at the beginning Cain might take as much ground as he could till and make it his own land, and yet leave enough to Abel's sheep to feed on. Cain might take as much ground as he could, yet leave enough to Abel's sheep to feed. Few acres would serve for both their possessions, but as families increased, thank you, Locke. Industry enlarged their stocks, their possessions enlarged with the need of them. Their possessions enlarged with the need of them. And yet was commonly without any fixed property in the ground they made use of, till they incorporated and settled themselves together. Built cities, and then by consent, i.e. by positive law of the place and the enclosures. This consent is positive. Or right, depending even. This could be a right. It came in time to set out the bounds of their distinct territories. Process which was coming to fruition even through the 19th century. And agree on limits between them and their neighbors, and by laws within themselves settle the properties of those of the same society. We see that in that part of the world which they first inhabited, therefore like to be best peopled, even as low down as Abraham's time, they wandered with their flock and the herds which was their substance. Their literal substance and being was their flock. Freely up and down, and this Abraham did it in a country where he was a stranger. Is it Exodus 22:2 or 2:22? It kind of echoes that one. Abraham's not in Exodus. There's an echo of that. Yet, whence was a plain least a great part of the land lay in common, and the inhabitants valued it not, nor claimed property in any more than they made use of. But when there was not room enough in the same place for their herds to feed together, they by consent, as Abraham and Lot did, Genesis, separated and enlarged their pasture, where it best liked them. For the same reason Esau went from his father and his brother and planted in Mount Seir. Here's section 38. So I started off by saying that there is a Latin connection here, but he seems to be going to the Old Testament sources to make his point, whatever his point might be. But as I pointed out before we're getting into this part, Locke will have to keep honest men honest, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not saying I believe that statement. All I'm saying is that Locke is using this particular authority, and I'm going to counterbalance it with the authority of the language he's used at the very beginning to make the point. And I've highlighted it as much as I can, really. So let's put the nail in the coffin. See ancient Rome, where it is a routine choice to kill or trade whatever part of one's stock is eating the Roman out of household. What? This is what he's saying here. Cain might take as much ground as he could and make it his own, and yet leave enough to Abel's sheep to feed on. Few acres would serve for both their possessions, and as families increased in industry and enlarged their stocks, possessions enlarged with the need of them. They need more land to graze the increased flock, because the land only produces, if they don't cultivate it, a certain amount of food. So the food which you can cultivate on 10 acres or is the same as 1,000 acres. At any rate, in ancient Rome, it has become a routine choice for these owners of peculium. The owner of the peculium has a choice. He's presumably cultivating the land. From his 10 acres, he produces enough food to provide for a flock which he keeps, plus his own household. But if he is miserly, if he continually keeps the value of this property on the increase, something has got to give sooner or later, and he will have to kill or trade whatever part of his stock is eating him out of household. He might have livestock of many different kinds. And in the sense that it might be cattle as in cows or sheep or pigs perhaps, or it could be humans as in slaves, serfs, servants who are indentured under the yoke, so to speak. There's the livestock, but there's also the household itself. Which are being differentiated throughout this section in two different ways. First by Cain and Abel. We can imagine to be a fairly normative situation where there's a direct competition between close relatives for the same psychic coordinated property. Psychic coordinated in the sense they're used to it. They think of it as their own through their family line. And then later by Abraham and Lot. Who separated in geographic distance. The funny thing about the Roman situation with livestock and household competing for limited resources was that there was a process of usury internal to the Roman system. So if he was not very, very, how to put it? If he wasn't quite proactive in maintaining the relationship between available food to livestock and household, the right ratio, and got rid of the right livestock in whatever way, hopefully he wouldn't get caught in a position of having to kill a whole lot of livestock that can't be consumed, that can't be spent in some other way. And if he wasn't proactive, the likely result is that his household would become livestock. And this, in the Roman system, by usury. there were sometimes revolts in the old republic among the soldier class who had been given parcels of land as a course of their military service, but who, because of interest payments or gambling debt sometimes, lost the title to their land, basically by watching their increase or by being profligate with it. Strangely, Locke wants to use the Old Testament as his authority when he's defined his authority right at the beginning. And it shows at least how old, I suppose, the problem of keeping livestock is. And rather than talking about anything, quote, Roman, we'll hide in the pages of the so-called, I could call it the orange Catholic Bible solution. Now, I found this funny when I was thinking about it earlier today, because I knew I would be getting to this point and making this exact joke. It uses the Old Testament exclusively as an authority, and yet labels it peculiar. Here is the Orange Catholic Bible joke of John Locke. And this from me, a Fremen. Well, Fremen friendly. I'm Fremen friendly. Oh, what am I talking about here? I am talking about the Butlerian jihad, which in certain fictional representations is kicked off after this document is created, the Orange Catholic Bible. The Butlerian jihad is a counter-revolution to the societal changes which are instituted by this forced event. This was dictated, this joining of the Bible from two different radically divergent traditions kicks off a counter-revolution immediately that entirely changes the nature of information gathering, sharing, and flow from that point onward. But that's exactly what this is a use and a reading, a strategic reading of the King James type of Bible to find specific examples to hide the nature of this legal relationship, which goes back to Rome for Britain, depending on where they are. Could be usury, could be considered usury. Some of this particular chapter 38, or I wouldn't call it chapter. This section 39. And the good news is I'm not going to actually do every one of these. I'm only going to do the ones that are most interesting, which are basically the ones up to around the end. Section 39. And this without supposing any private dominion. What? And thus, without supposing any private dominion, property in Adam all over the world, exclusive all other men, which can no way be proved, nor any one's property be made out from it, but supposing the world gives, as it was, to the children of men in common, we see how labor could make men distinct titles to several parcels of it for their private use, wherein there could be of no doubt of right, no room for quarrel. labor makes distinct parcels the mark of the owner. This is a exercise of a gift of tongues, I suppose. As children of men in common, we see labor could make men distinct titles to several parcels. The mark. Section 40. Nor is it strange, perhaps before consideration as may appear, that the property of labor should be able to overbalance the community of land. For the labor, indeed, that puts the difference in value on everything. And let anyone consider what the difference is between an acre of land planted with tobacco or sugar, sown with wheat or barley, and an acre of the same land lying in common, without any husbandry upon it. And you will find that the improvement of the labor makes the far greater part of the value. So I've colored the land value as green in either case, but the husbandry upon it separately. I think it would be but a very modest computation to say, products of the earth useful to the life of man, 9/10, I'll mark that in green, are the effects of labor. Oh, you dirty bugger. Nay, if we will rightly estimate things as they come to our use, to cast up several experiences about them that are merely purely owing to nature, what to labor, and we shall find that most of them, 99 hundredths, are wholly to be put in the account of labor. Oh, nay, if we rightly estimate, buddy, I'm going to get a little picky here. Cast up several expenses about them. What in them is purely owing to nature, and what to labor, all right in red. We shall find that most of them, 99 hundredths, are wholly to be put in account of the labor. I told you, he's a tricky man with the numbers. I'll put the fractions down that I suggested earlier. This is better numbers. More truthful numbers. I think I explained why earlier. Let's say that he owns the land and somebody else works the land, and the 10 acres yields, or the 1 acre yields 10 times more. At the end, the land belongs to him. The labor provided to him gave him 10 times the yield that would have come if it had been laying in common outside of his fence. Where's his 9/10? Does he mean 10/11? Yes, he does. Because 9/10 of it, let's follow his argument here again. Yes, he does. He means when he says 9/10, he's actually talking about 10/11. Where's my bloody calculator gone? Yeah, it's not in my friggin' hand, so that's that. I gotta know now. There's there's 9/10. It's actually 91% when you really work out the numbers, but yeah. He's pinching a little bit there, isn't he? He's pinching a little bit. Mr. knows his logarithmic scale. He is pinching a little bit by calling it 9/10 and taking away that in common this would have gotten an acre. An acre would have gotten an acres of yield anyhow. So this is a ton from an acre. This is 10 tons from an acre. All other things being equal, I think he means 91%, not 9/10. You say this is quibbling? Oh, hang on a minute. Hang on. Labor puts the difference of value on everything. I do believe that's his own words. I shall be using his petard to do so. Puts the difference of value on everything. And indeed, his argument just a little bit before, what was it? Oh, right. That there is uncultivated, gee whiz. Uncultivated, darn again. Uncultivated land, which yields X. And then there is cultivated, which yields 10 times X. Am I right? It's the act of cultivation which puts all of the value in the transaction. Is that not his argument? Currency does weigh a god-awful lot, John. Currency does weigh a god-awful lot. I said that to myself on my notepad earlier. I should have wrote that down before popping the joke. Currency does weigh a god-awful lot. I'm gonna take a break. It's time for me to take a little smoke a broke. I don't smoke in my house. I gotta smoke outdoors. It's the dude of the Dolce Vita. I've been listening to a little bit of Warren Zevon on my own. I shall return shortly. brought the mic up, but it's going to be a long one, hey? It's going to be a long one. Is YouTube still allowing me to stream? Did it cut me off again? I don't know. It says I've been live 2 hours. It says no views. All right, I could care. I mean, long-term value is what I'm thinking here. Section 40 is the one we're on, right? Yeah. Currency does weigh a god awful lot, John. That was a joke for the break. 9/10 are the effects of labor. And who has serfs, John? And who has serfs when they're talking about those kind of fractions? Because pinching a little bit here and there is someone's eminent domain, I do believe. 99/100ths are wholly the effects of labor. And I draw your attention to the fact that this is more appropriately the truth. More appropriately the truth. Right here. I'll highlight it. I say this is more appropriately the truth to the truth that he says. 99/100ths are wholly the effects of labor. I say there's 100 101ths that are wholly the effects of labor, since the original acre would have yielded 1 unit value, being his original premise. The original premise being the value upon which the land would have yielded, free for anyone's taking, was 1. Why would John not be honest with his numbers? Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you, should we not expect more from Mr. John Locke? What are indeed 100 divided by 101? Ooh, it is pretty close to 99%. But if you were to let that add up over time, friends, little bits add up. Little bits add up. I had a reply there earlier too. Lol, as anticipated, John. You're not following your own logic. Where's the differences going? Where does the difference go on any disputes involving the numbers? Where does the difference go? Is the question. And I have the answer to the question here. Where does the difference go? Question. Oh, this is hardly viewable. And the answer. Oh yeah, I did. That's where the interest. That's where the difference goes. Difference goes to interest payments. And a question which occurred to me while I was reading this, question which I think I anticipated he would be ready to answer, which I'll draw a line through here to indicate this is a whole other line of reasoning. Hey, does one of these, does A equal B? Does a unit value X equal a unit of the 10X? I mean to say is the product at the end, the uncultivated ton of output, is the uncultivated ton worth the same as a ton of cultivated? That's my question. Per ton, or whatever the unit value happens to be. Here comes a couple of quicker ones, I think. $41. He compares and contrasts North America with Europe. Clear demonstration of anything. Those who are rich in land and poor in comforts of life, of whom nature having furnished as liberally as any other people the materials of plenty, of fruitful soil apt to produce in abundance what might serve as food, raiment, and delight, yet for want of improving by labor, have not 1/100th part of convenience that we enjoy in Europe. And a king of large and fruitful territory there feeds, lodges, and is clad worse than a day laborer in England. $42. Here comes my second kick at the cat. The second kick at the cat of the question I just asked. My anticipated question: does one uncultivated X equal one cultivated X? To make this a little clearer, let us trace some of the ordinary provisions of life through the process of cultivation and or being made into property. Several progresses before they come into our use, and see how they receive their value from human industry. Oh, I'm sorry, I should have put that way. Value. Bread, wine, and cloth, things of daily use in great plenty, yet notwithstanding acorns, water, and leaves, or skins must be our bread, drink, and clothing. Did they not furnish us with more useful commodities? Did not labor furnish us? For whether bread is more worth than acorns, wine than water, and cloth than silk, and leaves and skins or moss was wholly owing to labor and industry. One of these being food and raiment, which unassisted nature furnishes with us. The other provisions which our industry and pains prepare for us, for how much they exceed the other in value, for when anyone hath computed, he will then see how much labor he makes, by how much labor makes far greater part of value any things we enjoy in the world. And the ground which produces the materials, is scarce to be reckoned in as any, at most, but very small part of it. It's a 1 part in 101, say. So little that even amongst us, land that is left wholly to nature, that hath no improving or pasturage, tillage, or planting, is called, indeed as is, waste. I might as well mark that in a different color, right? Wasteland. For we shall see the benefit of it amount to little more than nothing. Easy for him to say, human doesn't have to depend on it. Shows how much numbers of men are to be preferred to largest of domains or dominions. This shows how much the numbers of men are to be preferred to largest of dominions, which means you must be able to feed these men, plus the livestock, and the increase of lands and the right employing of them in the great art of government, and that prince who shall be so wise and godlike. Because without the prince, they need a fucking constitution. We establish the laws of liberty to secure protection and encouragement to the honest industry of mankind. Oh, there is the honest man being kept honest. So saith the Locke. Against the oppression of power and the narrowness of party will quickly be too hard for his neighbours, but this by the by. In return to the argument at hand. Does one cultivated ton equal one uncultivated ton? Part 2. And his response is, no, it does not. Although I don't think it's entirely provisional, no. And it isn't well defended. I don't think it's well defended. It's attackable. On the other hand, is his proof, attackable or otherwise, is here. And I do tend to agree with him. Available labor is better than available land, with the proviso that you must be able to feed it. This is one of these provisions. Ability to feed. Which means there's a scalable problem with how much livestock to how much land to how much of a household. $43. Geez, I don't know how YouTube's going to handle this. Funny. Not my problem. 43. Acre of land that bears here 20 bushels of wheat in northern America, which, with the same husbandry, would do the like, are without doubt of the same natural intrinsic value. Thank you very much, Mr. Locke. I asked, I have received. But yet the benefit mankind receives from the one in a year is worth 50 or 5 pounds, 5L, in case you can't read that. But yet, benefit mankind receives from one, mankind meaning his own culture, in a year is worth 5 pounds. £5 of silver, and from the other possibly not worth a penny. The one from America, which the same husbandry would do the like. But he's talking about the output. All the profit the Indian received. Ooh, wait, now I get this. If all the profit an Indian received from it were to be valued and sold here, where there is no need of it, at least I might truly say not 1,000th. No shit. It is labor then which puts the greatest part of value upon land, without which it would be scarcely worth anything. It is to that we owe the greatest part of all useful products, for that the straw, bran, bread, that of an acre of wheat is worth more than the product of an acre of good land which lies waste, and is all the effect of labor. But it is not barely the plowman's pains, the reaper's, the thresher's toil, and the baker's sweat to be counted in the bread we eat. The labor of those who broke the ox, who digged and wrought the iron, the stones, who felled and framed the timber, employed all the plow, mill, oven, or any other utensils, which are a vast number, requisite to this corn, from it being feed to it being sown to its being made bread, must all be charged on the account of labor. Yep. And received as an effect of that. Gosh and gracious, yes. Nature and the earth furnished only by the almost worthless materials as in themselves. It would be a strange catalogue of things that industry provided and made use of. About every loaf of bread before it came to our use, is if we could trace them. Iron, wood, leather, bark, timber, stone, bricks, coal, lime, cloth, dyeing, drugs, pitch, tar, mast, ropes, and all the materials made use of it in a ship that brought any of these commodities made use of by any other workman in any part of the work, all which would be almost impossible, almost at least too long to be reckoned up. This is a very long passage, but it's quite astute given the content of the rest. Lulls. So yeah, I got a lulls put down here. Why local industry makes foreign imports nearly worthless. Yeah, I might as well write that down. And then also in nope. But yeah, this is only, don't think that I'm saying this is true necessarily. Nope. There's another problem which he isn't actually talking about. Let's suppose we have a smart owner of land who doesn't have a big household, doesn't want a big household, and keeps his increase. Or tries to maybe doesn't keep his increase, but tries to produce as much as possible. In short, to overproduce. In short, to overproduce. Overproduction does the same thing as is being described here. Because it has no place within the economic order which created it. This overproduction can't be easily gotten rid of. So the 100 to 1 or 1,000 to 1 rate of increase yielded from this original investment, this equals problems. More money, more problems, right? If Locke is true. If he's true, this rate of increase equals problems if that isn't required by the household which is producing it. Because waste, if the waste doesn't get consumed by the ones who ought to consume it, because it's theirs. Vastness of markets demands that. Oh yeah, the vastness of market demands are wonderful to behold. Agreed. I agree with that part. The vastness of the market itself and the demands upon it are wonderful to behold, which is the entirety of the reading. "44. From all of which it is evident. Takes all the above as sufficient proof of private property and eminent domain." I'm going to sum that up nice and quickly. All which is evident. Oh, shoot. Undo that one. That through the things nature is given in common, yet man being master of himself, proprietor of his own person, the actions of labor of it still in himself the great foundation of property. After that, which making up the great part of what he applied to the support and comfort of his being, when invention and arts that improved the conveniences of life were perfectly his own and did not belong in common to others. So he sums it up with he takes everything above as a sufficient proof of eminent domain. There is only a little bit left, and I'm not going to go through the entirety tonight. I knew I wouldn't. I knew that I'd get down to about here. There's only a few more. I'll get back to that at another time, maybe. Hey! Just in time manufacturing process. How you doing, L. Jack? I'm having some fun with John Locke here, since I know the Locke has been on the lips of many, either for joking purposes or otherwise. But Locke in the early part was about natural rights and stuff. I think you'd like that part. That's early on. Jeez, it was a couple hours ago now. It's about hour 1 and 2. Let me turn that off for a second and just read ahead a little. Thus labor at the beginning gave a right of property wherever anyone was pleased to employ it upon what was common, and which remained a long while the far greater part. It'd be easier for me to use this bloody highlighter. And yet more than mankind makes use of. Men at first, for the most part, contented themselves with what unassisted nature offered to their necessities, and though afterward in some parts of the world where increase of people in stock, where, listen to this, where the increase of people and stock with the use of money has made land scarce, and so of some value. Excuse me? What's he talking about there? I'll tell you what he's talking about there. That's what he's talking about. How very simple when you know what to look for. Several communities settled the bounds of their distinct territories, and by law within themselves regulated the properties of private men of their society, and so by compact and agreement, these are called positive rights or positive law. by compact and agreement, settle the property which labor and industry began, and the leagues that have been made between several states and kingdoms, either expressly or tacitly disowning all claim and right to the land in others' possession, have, by common consent, given up the pretense to their natural common right, which is to say their natural law, natural common right. Given up their pretense to their natural common right, which was originally they had to those countries. And so have by positive agreement settled a property amongst themselves in distinct parts and parcels of the earth, yet these are still great tracts of ground to be found, or there still are great tracts of ground to be found, which the inhabitants thereof, not having joined with the rest of mankind in the consent of the use of their common money, in consent of the use of their common money, which we know is fucking problematic, lie waste and are more than the people that dwell on it do, or can make use of, and so still lie in common, though this can scarce happen amongst that part of mankind that have consented to the use of money. This can scarce happen among those parts of mankind that have consented to the use of money. And again, to be quite fair to John Locke, we couldn't do this reading up to this point without going through 1 Timothy 6. So, strangely enough, I've had to do everything from 1 Timothy 6 through here tonight. Greatest parts of things really useful to the life of men, such as the necessity of subsisting, made to the first commoners of the world look after, as doth the Americans now, are generally things of short duration, meaning venison, corn, such as, if they are not consumed by use, will decay and perish of themselves. Gold, so things which are different than, things which have a different value. Gold, silver, diamonds are things that fancy or agreement hath put in value on. Fancy or agreement. As demand hath put in value on more than real use, than necessary support of life. Now of those good things which nature hath provided in common, every one is a right, has been said, to as much as he could use in property, in all that he could effect with his labor, all that his industry could extend to, and alter from the state nature has put it, was his. He that gathered 100 bushels of acorns or apples had thereby a property in them, as they were goods as soon as gathered. As they were goods as soon as gathered. It was only his to look that he would use them before any spoiled, or else took more than his share and robbed others. Indeed, it was a foolish thing as well as dishonest to hoard up more than he could make use of. If he gave away a part to anybody else so that it perished not uselessly, if he gave away a part to anybody else, or bartered with it, perhaps, so that it perished not uselessly in his possession, so that it didn't perish, which would be a violation of the law, common law, in Locke's idea. Thus he also made use. These he also made use of. He spent. These he spends when he gives away a part to anybody else. If he also bartered away plums, here we go, it's barter. That would have rotted in a week. For nuts that would last good for his eating a whole year, he did no injury. He wasted not the common stock. He destroyed no part of the portion of goods that belonged to others, as long as nothing perished uselessly in his own hands. Thus, again, if he were to give away nuts for a piece of metal pleased with its color, or exchange for the sheep for shells, or wool for a sparkling pebble or a diamond, and kept them all his life, he invaded not the right of others. He might heap up as much of these durable things as he pleased, exceeding the bounds of his just property, not lying the largeness of his possession for the perishing of anything uselessly in it, but for the perishing of anything uselessly in it. perishable goods versus stuff that's not quite as fungible. Neat, huh? Neat. This is totally where I get off. It's totally where I get off for the morning. I dig this whiteboard thing. This is a good piece of software. This will help. This will make my job much easier. Thus came in the use of money, some lasting thing men might keep without spoiling. Drachma's gone a shekel. That by mutual consent men would take in exchange for the truly useful but perishable supports of life. Yes, in exchange for, so that they wouldn't have to be carrying around those perishable supports of life like bloody great cattle flocks following after you everywhere you go. My goodness, I'm right at the bottom of here anyway. And as different degrees of industry were apt to give men possessions in different proportions, so this invention of money gave them the opportunity to consider and enlarge them. Which is, I made all the jokes about money before I even got to this part. I knew full well he was done at part 44. And that there was a joke to be made about the weight of the currency itself. Long before we're ever getting to part 44. So, that's John Locke. But hey, that's only half the battle, from my point of view. Because having pointed out that I am indeed not afraid of John Locke, I am also forced to identify that I am in possession of yet other things. And it's in the description. Gutenberg ebooks /360. So link in the description. Pierre Joseph Proudhon takes apart John Locke's property ideas as well as many others. For the preceding 100 years up to his own time, he takes what he considers to be the best of the arguments and picks them apart. So, YouTube, my name is James PFP. This was a Banjocast production. Little pitchforks and flaming torches using Mr. John Locke. Lots of John Locke jokes in this one. Got any comments? Got any queries? Check below. Put them below. Send me a message. I'd love to hear about it. Think anyone else would like to hear about this thing? Let them know. Share. I'll talk to you later. Thanks for watching.